Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Supporter Spotlight number 50. We've got 2 tanks replays and 2 warships replays for you today, and we're going to kick off with this Object 430 version 2 game from King Trigon. Now this is a slightly unusual sight, not the tank itself, but the fact that he has formed an in-game platoon with these 2 Skoda T50s, and I think that's in part because they seem to be the only tanks that realise the importance of the cap circle and this side of the map. The entire rest of the team has gone west. So this could be very bad news. They could basically be in a position where they have to run away very quickly. Now of the 3, only Trigon's tank has any kind of armour, so basically he'll be at the front doing the spotting, tanking the damage, and hopefully the Skodas will be also helping out doing some damage, because it's a pretty capable tank, but compared to Russian medium tanks, yeah, quite squashy. So there's one of the enemy tier 9s, a T54, whose DPM is, I think, even actually slightly better than this. But the DPM on this is still pretty good, and that pretty good DPM could come in very useful, that ability to do a fair bit of damage very quickly. I don't know why this M4190 keeps peeking out like that. You know, you'd think after losing the vast majority of their health that would have given them, you know, pause for thought, but no, they kept doing it. So yeah, he's also managed to take a fair chunk of health out of this T54 as well, although the T54 is playing a little bit more cautiously. So far though, Trigon is still full health himself, so that's good, because there's definitely a few things coming over here, but actually not that much, all things considered. The biggest worry is the E50, but of course the Charioteer and the Scorpion also have guns to be worried about. And you know, if they let the T26 E5 live for long enough, that also could be a problem in combination with the rest. But if it comes to a one-on-one between that and this tank, well, Trigon should hopefully be able to come out on top. So one of the Skodas has moved up, but he's nearly dead. The other one's still a little bit far back. At this point, he could have just fallen back himself. And, you know, they've taken out a couple of tanks. They could have used this time that they've bought for their team on the other flank to clear things up. And instead, Trigon has just absolutely gone for it. Now, some of the other tanks that were here have gone for that Skoda, so he's not facing everything himself. But, yeah, this might be more than, you know, he's bitten off more than he can chew. So, we'll see. So the Charioteer has gone from, and he's immediately switched target to that, because lower armour, lower health, and actually a nastier gun, potentially, than the T26E5, so that immediately became the priority. So he's down, still the T26E5 to take care of, and it is just 1 versus 1. You know, having said that, 1 versus 1, he doesn't have to be too worried. Well, he's still full health, he's actually doing alright here. This is not a bad engagement at all, and even though the T26E5 has now switched to premium ammo, he's still having a hard time penning Trigon's turret at this close range. So there's the E50, but he's managed to finish off that guy just in time, and a CDC's turned up as well, but he's very, very low health. Now I'm not sure if that was meant as a tracking shot or if he was going for the lower front plate and it missed, but either way, looking at the team list, they've basically won this. Their team on the other flank lost very few tanks, and despite them therefore having numerical superiority on this flank, well, between Trigon and the 2 Skodas, and really primarily King Trigon, they've absolutely kicked butt. This enemy team got completely rolled over. So, yeah, as it turned out, the fact that they were outnumbered on this flank didn't actually matter at all. And you can never quite predict how these engagements are going to go. This was a big risk, going in aggressively like that. And worst case scenario, they'd have probably lost, but there were enough fast tanks left to come back and reset before the enemy team would have been able to cap. So, in retrospect, maybe not that big of a risk, but still, the fact that he's come through it alive with nearly 6,000 damage is not half bad. So that was quite a fun engagement. You know, it was a very one-sided game, but it was quite a fun medium tank brawling engagement. So there we go, ace tanker, steel wall, and a high caliber, unsurprisingly. And if you guess top of the team, yeah, definitely top of the team. And actually the Skodas only did about 2,000 between them, so it really was Trigon absolutely kicking butt there, by far and away ahead of everybody on XP and damage. And that was just a really nice result, really. It's not the only replay in this tank you sent me, but I went with this one because it was just fun. It was just fun to watch. So next we have You Got Beat by a Girl, who keeps sending me T49 replays, and I keep meaning to show the T49 replays, but then my eye gets caught by other things she sent me, like this, the newly buffed FV4005, which has a rather more crude nickname, shall we put it. I'm sure you know what it is, but yeah, it, along with the other British turreted tank destroyers from tiers 7 to 10, have had a range of buffs. And for tiers 7 and 9 that means new guns, but for tiers 8 and 10, well, the tier 8 gets I think better gun depression, and there might be one or two other handling changes as well, but this has had some quite significant buffs. It's got a better engine, so it has better horsepower per ton. It doesn't go any faster, but you know, it moves around better. It now has a better range on the turret. Previously I think it was 45 degrees to each side, but now it's 90 degrees to each side, so that's a big improvement. It has decreased dispersion, it has more ammo, and also it has better gun depression. So all of these things are going to add up to a more comfortable experience. And You Got Beat has actually been chasing the ace in this for, well, I don't know how long, but there's a couple of replays she sent me of this from the previous patches. So she's obviously been working away at getting the ace, and now that it's been buffed, well, will this be the game? We shall see. So a bit of a risky snapshot, but the fact that there's now 20 rounds of ammo versus the old 12 means that you can afford to take a couple more snapshots. Previously, you absolutely could not. You just did not have the ammo to spare. And the reload, of course, isn't any better, but just the ability to know that you've got 1 or 2 rounds of ammo to potentially throw away on riskier shots, that can be very useful. So, side of a tier 8 tier 9 tank destroyer rather, easy 1600 damage. This is all the premium Hesh, of course. I mean, if you see somebody in this thing or the Death Star, you pretty much have to assume that they are going to be using Hesh ammo. Can she do the same thing again? Well, it's a bit of a risk because we know there's the CDA back there, but with the reload coming up, there we go. Even if she does take a hit from the CDA, which she does, that was a good trade. That was absolutely a good trade. So that's another 704 out of the way, taking 300 odd damage to do 1600 in return. Absolutely worth it. So talking of the CDA, are they going to be wary enough to pull back, or are they just going to sit there and let You Got Beat sit and aim? And the answer is yes, yes they are. So that's another kill. Yeah, that Hesh is it's pretty nasty, hey? So they're clearing out this side, which is a good thing because the enemy team is pushing rather heavily on those northern tanks. But that means they've got this flank secure. They're not going to get any tanks coming up round behind them, and they can now turn around and help their teammates, who are actually hanging on reasonably well. And it's obviously helped by the fact that there's no artillery. So another tank destroyer. 268 this time, and well, if she can get it, it's going to be just the top of the tank, but if it's a penetrating hit in the top of the tank, well, could have been nice, but as it was a mere 867 damage. So she spotted the T49 to the south, and as a somewhat veteran T49 player, she knows exactly the danger that thing poses to her tank, so I think she's being a little bit wary of that and not exposing herself too much. Clearly this IS-7 is very tempting as well, but it would mean giving a potentially a clear line of fire to the T49, so rather than go for it, she's being a little more cautious. Fortunately that Emil one was not cautious and has managed to get themselves killed in the process. So, rather than go for the IS-7, she's taken out the IS-3, penetrating shot into the rear armour, another 1500 damage, as you do. Quite a few one-shots in this game so far. Well, that's the power of these Hesh shells. And for a bonus kill, well, hello 268, that's the one she failed to penetrate earlier, but with a nice little nudge, she manages to finish them off. So at this point she trades more health to do damage, finishing off the Ferdinand. A bit of a big hit, but she'd rather take that hit than the T-49, because the T-49 with, I don't even know which ammo they'd be likely to be using, but that could have really hurt. That could have been, you know, 900, 1000 damage, which would have left her on very low health indeed. So sometimes when it's facing off against that kind of a derp gun versus a gun where you know roughly how much damage they will, versus, you know, the gamble of a shot that might not penetrate from a derp gun, yeah, you go for the known quantity, generally speaking, and in that case, you know, it worked out. Somebody else took out the T-49, so it really wasn't a problem. So that just leaves the T-28, but she's going to pull up into render range just in time for them to have been blown up, so never mind. No final kill, but still, that's Top Gun. That's not bad. So there it is. There's that ace mastery she's been chasing, along with the Top Gun and a high caliber. 7.6k. Unsurprisingly, she lost money because she was firing Hesh the entire time. She was packing some AP shells, and there are times when you would use the AP shells, but Hesh is just the kind of the safe bet. You know, either it's going to pen and be hilarious, or else it's going to do some splash damage. There are very few circumstances under which a Hesh would not do damage if you hit the end of a gun barrel. And considering how much Hesh she shot, that isn't actually such a bad credit loss. I don't think she really cares about 9k credits lost, not when she finally got her ace tanker. So now we're on to the warships and the gearing. This is K538, which I'm probably going to get completely mangled because it's numbers. We know how good I am at numbers. And in this particular game, there are quite a lot of divisions. It's also a rather tier 10 game, with a smattering of tier 9s and some rather unlucky tier 8s. Now this is Two Brothers, but it's standard Two Brothers, so that might make for some quite weird gameplay, because Two Brothers, when it's the domination mode, you can end up with a carousel, or sometimes you can end up one flank pushing and the other flank being a bit defensive, or, you know, there's a variety of ways in which it can go, but in standard games you tend to end up with a huge number of ships on one flank and then maybe a couple on the other, and it can go pear-shaped very easily depending on what the team does. So K, we're just going to say K because I'll never remember the numbers correctly. He's successfully dodged the Shima Torps. The enemy team does have 3 Shimikazes. But the downside is he was spotted stationary in the water, and he could have popped his smoke a bit sooner maybe, and he could be healing in fact, but with the heal at least it might be that he was willing to burn a few hit points to increase his reload. It's very likely that he's using Adrenaline Rush, because it's a very, very useful skill on a destroyer, especially a destroyer with torpedoes, usable torpedoes. You know, if you're in a Russian destroyer, for instance, you're not going to care about your torp reload that much. But in something like a gearing, where the torps are eminently usable, well, being able to shave some time off at the expense of a few thousand hit points, you know, that's not too bad. Now, one complicating factor is that there are carriers on each side, so that could be a bit tricky. There are also radar cruisers, but they're less likely to be a factor because this isn't a domination game. In some ways, standard games are actually better for destroyers, because in domination games, in a destroyer, well, your duty, so to speak, is to go and contest the cap points. And if you happen to be in a destroyer that's unsuitable for that, but there aren't really any other destroyers on the team, then you can be a bit screwed. And if there are lots of radar cruisers around, contesting those cap points can be very, very difficult indeed. And of course, you know, with the carrier also in play, that could be an additional complication. But this is, you know, having said it can be a bit weird, it can end up being a bit stilted. It potentially also gives him more freedom in a destroyer. You'll notice, by the way, that he's using the defensive AA consumable rather than the speed boost. He never actually uses it in this game. I don't know why. It might be that he just didn't think to. It might be that the opportunities when he could have used it, he decided not to. I mean, I'm not sure if he's completely spec'd for AA or not. You can do a gearing AA spec and get a very respectable DPS out of it. But it might be that he's using it for strictly short-range defensive purposes to scatter enemy drops, basically. So it's turned out the enemy carrier, is actually parked up right near the channel, which gives them a very quick turnaround on the planes, but it means they're basically screwed, because now they've been spotted. Now their team has been able to push up. That carrier has nowhere to go. Now the enemy team, I mean, they're basically playing in a really defensive fashion. K's team has been able to push the ships that were on this flank back. They've only actually killed one ship so far. You know, there's one ship that's died. The others have just been pushed back. But even though that means, therefore, that the enemy team has a superiority on the other flank, they haven't pushed that flank. They have played defensive on both sides. So it's K's team's game to lose at this point, because the enemy team isn't really playing to win this. They're not trying to take control of the map, even parts of the map. They're just falling back and bunching up. Now, when you get a bunched up team like that, that can actually be quite dangerous, because that represents a concentration of firepower, and potentially at that point, you know, it can look like things are going well and then it can all turn against you. But that's not really happening this time round. They are still ahead on kills, even though it's only a few ships that have died overall so far, but they are absolutely in the driving seat. They have the control here. They are putting on the pressure. So there's Ashima down. That's another kill for K. He actually got the first kill, of course, with the lion going down, which is quite a useful one to knock out. The enemy team also has a Conqueror, who is low health, and they must have used a heal at some point already, but they've obviously taken a fair old battering to get down to that point. So knocking that out is also going to be very, very useful. They're already at this point, even though over half the enemy team is left alive, pushing the cap point. They've had ships come down through that middle channel. This is how little control the enemy team has right now. So with the Conqueror out the way, well, there's a rather low health Des Moines there, which would be useful to take out because, hey, it's a radar ship. But it's not even that much of a threat. I mean, they might be just about within radar range, but I don't know if they ever got a chance to use it, and they never will at this point because they've just been obliterated by Yamato. So now the pressure is really on the enemy team. I don't know if the intent of all these people in the cap circle is seriously to cap, but sometimes, even if you don't intend to cap, it's worth getting in there because it puts immense pressure on the enemy team, and whatever they might have been doing, they've either got to turn around and deal with you or else just give up entirely. So this is bringing people back that potentially K could do more damage to, including the remaining last Shimakaze. I think they've got... no, actually, I tell a lie. There's two Shimas still alive. So that's not particularly welcome being spotted like that, but you know, in a gunfight with the gearing versus a Shima, unless the gearing is at a significant health disadvantage to begin with, the Shima's generally going to come off worse. It's not that the Shima's guns are bad, they actually do rather decent damage, but the difference in DPM is pretty significant. So the other Shimas dropped torps into the cap from the south, so we know where they are, and there's probably torps coming in from that Shima, but where K has managed to position himself well, he's able to basically use that bit of island to protect himself. So torps shouldn't be a worry, unless he accidentally eats one from that third and final wide spread from the south. So there's that other Shima's Torps. That only looks like 2 lots, so they might have 1 still in reserve. Sometimes I do that in my own Shima. I'll put out 2 lots of Torps and save the 3rd. Or it could be that their reload was just out of sync, because that happens sometimes as well. So they're well ahead on points at this point. I mean, they are getting a bit reset, and we know the Shima is in the cap circle. There we go. That's the other Shima who's still full health. But yeah, they would have to work hard to throw this away at this point. The enemy team has, what is it, 2 Shimas and the Moskva left alive. K himself is getting a little low on health, and he's got to be a bit careful because, you know, if the Shimas and the Moskva are all shooting at him, he probably won't last very long. And in fact, one of the Shimas, that guy that spotted, because, you know, you might as well fire if you spotted at that point, he's not going to get unspotted, and the Moskva were firing at him, but it wasn't quite enough to kill him, even though he is now very low health. So the Torps completely missed. They might have the range for the Moskva if he somehow got lucky enough to get a random hit. But all things considered, he's not done a huge amount of damage with his Torp hits overall. I mean, the Torps on the gearing are pretty good, but he's only had 3 hits. And having said not a huge amount of damage, that probably is still the majority of his damage. But it's less than... I think they do less damage than the Shima Torps, because the Shima Torps are like, what, is it 21 point something K? Shima Torps hit hard. They really do. So, with the Moskva having died, that's just that last low health Shima, and K is very well placed to get this kill. If he can hit him. Maybe. Which would be nice. It would be a 3rd kill and a little bit more damage, but it would be more the kill than the damage that would be worth XP at this point. Although I think he's already taken a fair chunk of this guy's health. And there we go. Finally manages to nail him. Yeah, it was a little bit drawn out there, or at least it felt a little bit drawn out, but yeah, he did manage to land the hits in the end, and that left him with a grand total of almost 105,000, 104.865k, which actually, no, you can say it that way, but I don't know why. I don't know, I'm being awkward with the numbers after having said I would avoid the numbers. Still managed to be awkward with the numbers. Almost 2.4k base XP. Yeah, that was a pretty good gearing game, I thought. And yeah, you can see, actually, yeah, I was right. The 3 Torp hits, 27, almost 28k, 47.5k from the guns, and another 29-ish from the fires set. So it really was gunboat gearing in that one, but the extra bit of damage from the torpedoes was quite nice as well. Lastly, we have this Scharnhorst game from Horoso here, who is actually a reasonably new Patreon supporter at this point. So this is his first appearance in this video series, and he's in a pretty good ship. The Scharnhorst is actually quite fun. A big part of it, of course, is the fact that it's a German battleship, and therefore in the context of warships as tough as old boots. But also, with those 11-inch guns, you get a pretty nice rate of fire. So it makes a pretty nice brawling ship. It's got the torpedoes, and you get to fire quite often. And although the HE isn't nearly as effective as the King George V, for example, it's still, you know, it's sufficient. It's still battleship caliber HE, so if you need to switch to it for firing at an angled enemy battleship, it's there as an option. It's not like the KGV where the HE is almost the ammo of choice. The AP is definitely viable. So you might have noticed this is really good matchmaking. This one is a couple of days old, I think, so there are a fair few October Revolutions in this game. It is in fact mostly tier 5 with a couple of tier 6s and a tier 7 or 2 on each team. So if you're one of those tier 7s, it's really nice matchmaking, but it's not so bad for the lower tiers either, because it means you can outnumber those higher tier ships. It's not like the previous game where there were a couple of tier 8s in amongst all the tier 9s and 10s, at which point you feel a lot more constrained. So I don't know his captain skills exactly. He may have manual secondaries, in which case it would explain a couple of moments where it seems like the secondaries should be opening up, but they're not, because he won't have clicked the control clicked the relevant ship. But in this case, he clearly has, And a couple more shots, he might actually get at close quarters, and there we go. I was a bit unlucky of that Nicholas running aground like that, but I'm not quite sure what they were doing in that position anyway, so who knows. So they've got themselves one cap circle, and they're kind of contesting the middle. The destroyers on both sides contesting the middle, so we've ended up with a big blob of their ships here, a big blob of enemy ships to the south, and things being relatively even at the moment. They're in a decent position to start pushing down and contesting the middle. And the enemy team kind of is the same, but the advantage of this northern cap circle is that there's more usable island cover here compared to the A cap, where yes, there are islands, but there aren't islands that you can fire over. There aren't islands that you can use to you know, keep in the fight but not take damage. If you're hiding behind those southern islands, you're just out of it completely. So this is why this northern cap point, the C cap point, is actually the desirable one to have at that. Even though, you know, in theory it's easier to then defend B because you've got those islands that people have to push round. Well, in practice people just tend to push round but wider, because if you're going to go round into a cap circle round the corner of an island when you know there's going to be a bunch of destroyers or things with torpedoes, well, at that point you're just asking for trouble. And most people aren't that daft. Most people will just avoid the things with torpedoes that they know are there. So, you know, it might take a little longer, but generally speaking, taking C and then pushing down to B is a lot more preferable than the other way around. So that poor Matsuki has gotten completely spotted and tried to spread their torps out a bit, but yeah, both the tier 6 Japanese destroyers are not very good, to be honest. You either are slow, or you don't get a lot of torpedoes, or the torpedoes just get spotted from really far away, or the torpedoes are fairly slow, or some combination of all of the above. He did take a citadel from something in all of that, which is a little bit unlucky. It was probably a plunging hit of some kind. I'm not quite sure what it could be. Each team has a tier 7 battleship, and all the other battleships are tier 5. So maybe it was the Texas, maybe it was the October Revolution. Unlikely to have been the Hood, though. I mean, not completely impossible, but knowing the Hood's guns versus, you know, the armour of the Scharnhorst, I find it a little unlikely that it would have been the Hood. So there's the Akatsuki, who might be just about in secondary range. At the moment, it's just looking for targets of opportunity, but I will say, at this point, things start to go slightly against them. They are trying to push this mid-cap point, but I don't think they are particularly focusing fire on the low-health enemies, on the important enemies that well. K himself is not K, that was the last guy. Hiroso himself is, for instance, completely ignoring that very low-health October Revolution and completely ignoring the emerald he was just shooting at. So he's spreading his damage around the place instead of trying to focus down particular lower health ships, knock enemy guns out of the fight. And the rest of his team is doing the same, it feels like. They're taking an awfully long time to take down some of these ships. There's also the danger here that Hiroso might be getting a little overconfident. We know that Akatsuki is around, and knowing that is incredibly useful, of course. But sometimes you can be in this situation and you're in a top tier battleship, and you're in a top tier German battleship, and you think, yeah, I'll just sail in and I'll kick all of the butt, and I got torpedoes and I got secondaries, and then that overconfidence turns out to be completely fatal. So there's always that danger as well. So once again, switching targets, this time to a full health Cleveland, and I think it might be because he had the thought of, well, the Cleveland left unchecked could be dangerous, which is true. But there are other better targets he could have hit just then. You know, there was a broadside October Revolution, the Koenig was rather closer, there's a Texas and the Hood pressing up on the other flank. So he would have had broadside things to hit potentially where he could have done more. You know, look how low health that Koenig is, for example. So this is my main criticism of his performance, and it's still going to be a decent performance, as you will see at the end, but he's just swapping targets a lot. And in a battleship, hell, even in a cruiser, unless you're kind of forced to, or unless a much better target comes up. Just randomly swapping targets is it's not a good strategy, because you're leaving enemy ships alive that otherwise you might have been able to take out much quicker, and that means more guns firing back at you and your team. And that's a bad thing, which, you know, I probably don't have to explain why that's a bad thing, but yeah, you want to knock out those enemy guns. So somebody's capping C, which accounts for the remaining unspotted enemy destroyer. We now know where they are, which is not great. I mean, the Hood's going up there as well, and it's only 2 ships potentially, but it also means that they're now kind of squashed in the middle a bit. But they are starting to bring this back on numbers. I mean, the enemy team is slightly ahead on points now that they are losing that cap circle, but they were a bit more down on ships than was comfortable at one stage, and I think they're now maybe starting to find a bit more traction, because the enemy team, while previously it was a bit more tightly grouped and the firepower that was coming in at them was maybe a bit more focused, at this point the enemy team is spreading out completely. And so that's reducing the number of targets in one place. That's maybe meaning that Hiroso's team and Hiroso himself are now more focusing on individual targets rather than hopping between different enemy ships and just doing a bit of damage to this one and a bit of damage to that one. So, you know, taking down those individual ships quicker is going to be a lot more beneficial for them. So he had a really nice salvo on that October Revolution. He's just sailing completely broadside. We'll see if he can maybe get another citadel, but no, sadly not. German dispersion strikes, and this is one of the reasons why the Scharnhorst is nice, because it does have that German battleship dispersion, but you get the faster reload. And so, you know, you put the shots out quicker. That dispersion matters to you a little bit less. So again, switching targets, but the Cleveland has gone broadside, and it turns out to be a good call, because he just eliminates him completely and prevents him from going behind the island. Somebody else takes out the October Revolution, and now they are very firmly in the lead. And he himself, you know, he's taken a bit of a battering, but nothing too bad. And this is why I'm thinking that the enemy team wasn't actually focusing individual targets that hard either, because in this kind of set of circumstances, with this matchmaking, if you had, you know, like a Scharnhorst on the enemy team or a Gneisenau or something, and a whole bunch of you were tier 5s, well, that's the thing you would try and take down first. That's the thing you would try and concentrate on, and at the very least you could either force them back out of the fight, or at the best case scenario you could kill them outright and take out a pretty dangerous enemy opponent. So both teams were maybe guilty of that particular sin. So the Texas is the next closest thing, and he's actually swapped to his HE at this point because he clearly doesn't fancy the angles, and the Texas is low enough health that it's not going to take that many hits even with the HE, even if he's not getting lucky with fires, which he's actually set 1, so if he sets more fires that should do the trick. But just the damage alone from the HE should be enough, whereas the AP is a lot more likely to bounce even against a tier 5 battleship. So he's trying to heal out of it, but yeah, he's under 1,000 hit points. And oh, he's almost at 2,000, but no, on fire again. So there we go, that's a high caliber and another kill for Hiroso. And so that just leaves the Akatsuki in the south, who just died, and the Hood, and then whatever this destroyer is. And we still don't know where that destroyer is. They've not been spotted the entire game. They've been playing it ultra cautious. So there's the Hood, who gets spotted just as Hiroso turns broadside, but with the Hood's guns, yeah, honestly, you don't have to worry too much. He lost a little bit of health there, but yeah, that was unlikely to be anything particularly spectacular. Even at very close range, the Hood's guns are not very impressive, even when you've got more or less, you know, the best penetration that you can get. So he aims a little high, still got the HE loaded. Honestly, AP against a broadside Hood, yeah, it'd probably be worth using just because you could fire faster than the Hood, but he's stuck with the HE, and now that the Hood is angled more, yeah, the HE is kind of what you would go for here. So, in that little interval, well, we now know what it is that was there, a Minikaze, and Well, he's clicked on him to put the secondaries on the guy, which may or may not get him some more damage. He is getting some hits. But I think he's just taking the chance that the Minikaze has put out torpedoes against somebody else. And there we go, actually does get another close quarters, and that close quarters also got him the Kraken. As it turns out though, no, that Minikaze had fired his torpedoes at him. So this is possibly going to hurt a little bit, but if you can avoid taking all of these torpedoes, then he should at least live. So there's one and there's two. A bit painful, but he survived, and that's the main thing. So that just leaves the Hood and potentially a 6th and final kill. The Hood's backing up at an angle, so yeah, HE all the way. But as to whether he'll get the kill or not, well, that's... who knows? That's up in the air. You know, he does have a pretty good rate of fire, but he's far from the only person firing at this guy. In fact, pretty much everybody's firing at this guy at this point. And as it turns out, it's the October Revolution that gets it. But still, he had a Kraken, so that's not too bad. In fact, that's actually pretty good. I didn't have any score screens for that one, but as you saw at the end there, it was a pretty nice amount of damage. 127,000. 5 kills, 2 close quarters, high caliber, he had devastating strike, and I think a Confederate as well. So that's a pretty nice roster of medals, all things considered. And it's maybe the kind of, like, you would expect a pretty good performance out of somebody if they were top tier in those kind of circumstances. But, you know, there's always the random factor of not every player is that good. So sometimes you'll see somebody given those kind of circumstances and they do absolutely terribly. So it's a good thing that wasn't the case there. And it was a good thing for Hiroso's team and a bad thing for the enemy team, because I don't think their Hood was particularly, you know, I think they were in that position. And even though the Hood's not a great ship, given that set of matchmaking, it still should have been able to do a reasonable amount, but I think under the circumstances, the Scharnhorst was definitely the stronger in that particular scenario. So that's it for this supporter spotlight video. You can find a link to my Patreon below. I know these are Patreon supporter videos, but I should probably make more of a habit of pointing out that I do, in fact, have a Patreon page, and you can go and support me there if you feel like it, which is particularly pertinent at the moment because, as with a lot of other people, my videos have just been getting randomly demonetized, and sometimes that means I get, you know, half or less of the ad revenue that I would have. And considering that a lot of people are using ad blockers to begin with anyway these days, it's not like that was a huge amount of money to begin with. So it all helps. Even just like $1 a month helps. So you can find the link to that below. You can find all the links to all my other social media stuff. You can hit the like button if you like this video. You can leave any comments. You can sub to my channel if you haven't already. And as always, stay tuned for more.